He had everything: money, power, and a mansion that stood as a symbol of success. But on one quiet night, this billionaire chose to pretend he was asleep, watching silently as the woman who cleaned his floors and her young son moved through his world. What he expected was simple obedience. What he saw instead shattered his assumptions and exposed a truth far bigger than wealth. It wasn't about money. It was about dignity, survival, and a test no child should ever face. The question is, what would you have done in his place? It seemed like just another evening inside the sprawling estate. The marble floors gleamed, chandeliers shimmered overhead, and silence filled the air except for the faint hum of machines working to keep the mansion spotless. For most, this was a place of unimaginable luxury. But for Maria, the maid, and her young son Elijah, it was where survival met servitude. Every corner they cleaned, every task they performed wasn't about comfort, it was about keeping their place in a world that often reminded them they didn't belong. Maria worked tirelessly, her hands rough from endless scrubbing, her spirit weighed down by years of quiet endurance. She had no wealth, no security, no guarantees. What she did have was her son, a boy with a quiet strength and a kindness that shone through despite the way life tried to dim it. For Maria, Elijah wasn't just her child, he was her reason for waking up every day, her proof that hope could still exist in the face of hardship. The billionaire, hidden behind his empire of success, noticed little. His wealth had built walls around him, walls that kept the world out and his judgments in. To him, Maria was simply an employee, one more figure in the background of his perfectly controlled life. But that night, curiosity pushed him to test something he had never dared before. Why? Perhaps it was boredom, or pride, or a belief that his wealth gave him the right to play with lives he did not understand. He decided to watch, silently, pretending to sleep, waiting to see what the maid's son would do when no one was watching. For Maria and Elijah, it was just another evening, another night of work in a house that wasn't theirs. For the billionaire, it was the beginning of a secret test. But what none of them could know was that this moment would tear open truths long buried, revealing a reality about power, prejudice, and dignity that could not be ignored. The house was quiet. The stage was set. And soon, one decision would change everything. The mansion was a fortress of wealth, marble pillars, gold accents, endless rooms filled with silence. To most, it was a place of privilege. But for Maria and her son Elijah, it was something else entirely. It was a reminder. A reminder that no matter how close they stood to luxury, they were always outsiders, never guests. That night, the billionaire lay in his vast bedroom, eyes half closed, body still, pretending to be asleep. But his mind was alert, sharp. He wanted to see. He wanted to know. Did this woman and her son respect his home? Did poverty make them desperate? Would they dare touch what wasn't theirs? Maria had no idea she was being watched. She moved quietly, carefully, as she always did. Years of labor had taught her how to be invisible. The world saw her skin before her effort, her accent before her dignity. To survive, she learned to step softly, to never make mistakes, to never give anyone a reason to question her presence. But tonight, the test wasn't about her. It was about Elijah. Elijah was only 12, but in those 12 years, he had learned lessons no child should carry. He knew how people looked at him in grocery stores, how security guards followed him in shops, how whispers trailed behind him like shadows. Even here, in the mansion where his mother worked, he knew the rules: don't touch anything. Don't wander. Don't look curious. Keep your head down. Still, he was a boy. And boys notice things. His eyes wandered toward the polished shelves, the glittering objects, the velvet curtains that looked like they belonged in another world. He didn't reach for them, didn't take a step closer, but curiosity lived inside him like a quiet flame. The billionaire's eyes flickered open ever so slightly. He saw the boy pause near the doorway, his gaze resting on the gleaming golden watch left carelessly on the nightstand. The billionaire's lips curled into the faintest smirk. This was it. The moment of truth. Would poverty win over innocence? Elijah's eyes lingered on the watch, its shine impossible to ignore. But then, slowly, he turned away. His gaze moved back to his mother, who was bent over, scrubbing the corner of the room where no one ever looked. He walked over to her and whispered something only she could hear. She smiled faintly, though her body sagged with exhaustion. The billionaire's smirk faded. He had expected greed. What he saw instead was restraint, discipline, love. But suspicion is a stubborn seed, it does not vanish so easily. Hours passed, the night deepened, and Maria finally guided her son toward the small room where they rested when work stretched too long. The billionaire lay still, pretending, but his mind raced. If not tonight, then another. If not the watch, then something else. He would wait. The next day, the test grew harsher. The billionaire left a wallet half open on the desk in his office. He placed bills in plain sight, crisp, inviting. He told Maria to clean there, knowing Elijah often followed. Then he sat back in another room, watching through the crack of a slightly open door. Elijah entered, trailing behind his mother. His eyes caught the wallet almost instantly. His footsteps slowed. The billionaire leaned forward, heartbeat quickening. This was the moment. Elijah stopped at the desk. His small hand hovered in the air, not touching, just lingering, as if curiosity had pulled him into its grip. His reflection stared back at him from the polished wood. He could hear his mother scrubbing in the corner, her breathing heavy, her hands raw from work. And in that second, he pulled his hand back, clenched it into a fist, and stepped away. The billionaire's eyes narrowed. Not once, but twice now, the boy had resisted. Yet instead of admiration, he felt irritation. He wasn't used to being proven wrong. In his world, money decided character. Temptation exposed weakness. But this boy was not fitting the mold. That night, Maria tucked Elijah into the small cot at the far edge of the servants' quarters. She kissed his forehead, whispering prayers of protection, of hope, of survival. Elijah didn't know why his mother prayed so often, but he felt it was because the world rarely prayed for them. Still, the test was not over. The billionaire was determined. On the third night, he crafted a crueler experiment. He left the safe door slightly ajar, a glimmer of jewelry visible inside. He positioned it so anyone passing would notice. Then he waited again, feigning sleep. Maria entered first, her body stiff, her eyes dull from fatigue. Elijah followed, slower, his gaze catching immediately on the light bouncing off diamonds and gold. His steps faltered. His breath hitched. The billionaire's pulse quickened. Elijah stepped closer, almost against his will, the way a moth drifts toward flame. He reached the door of the safe, staring into the glow of wealth he could never imagine owning. His reflection looked back at him again, but this time, it wasn't just his reflection, it was the question. Who are you? What will you choose? The boy's hand lifted, trembling, but then, he stopped. He turned his head, and for the first time, his eyes met the billionaire's. The man froze. Elijah had seen him. He wasn't asleep. Their gazes locked in a silent confrontation, child and billionaire, wealth and poverty, suspicion and dignity. And then, the boy spoke without words. His eyes said everything, I am not what you think I am. Elijah stepped back from the safe, turned to his mother, and placed a small hand in hers. Together, they left the room, their footsteps echoing in the cold, silent mansion. The billionaire lay there, stiff, exposed. He had tested them. He had watched them. And they had passed, again and again. But instead of peace, he felt something else rising in his chest. Shame. Because deep down, the truth was unavoidable, the test said more about him than it ever did about them. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, consequences came. Subtle, sharp, and cruel. Maria found her hours cut back without warning. Small mistakes, barely noticeable, were suddenly magnified. Her paycheck grew lighter. The whispers of disapproval grew louder. And always, she felt eyes on her, waiting for her or her son to slip. Elijah, too, began to feel it. The looks from other workers, the stiff politeness of strangers in the mansion, the invisible line between them and him. He wasn't trusted. He wasn't welcome. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how pure his choices, the color of his skin told a story the world was too willing to believe. The pressure mounted. Every day was a new test. Every glance carried suspicion. Every room felt like a stage. And through it all, the billionaire watched. Not because he needed to, but because he couldn't let go. He had seen the boy's strength, and it unsettled him. He had seen restraint where he expected weakness, dignity where he expected desperation. But instead of admiration, it only sharpened his need to control. To prove himself right. To remind them of their place. The rising tension filled the mansion like smoke, silent, invisible, suffocating. Maria tried to shield her son, to protect him from the weight pressing down on them. But Elijah felt it. He carried it in his small shoulders, in the way his eyes no longer lingered on beautiful things, in the way he kept his hands hidden, his steps measured. The house was no longer just a place of work. It had become a battlefield of suspicion, prejudice, and quiet endurance. And yet, the true breaking point was still to come. Because one night, one single night, the test would go too far. And what happened next would not just shake the walls of that mansion, but expose a truth the billionaire could never again ignore. The mansion had always been quiet at night, but on this evening, silence felt heavier. The kind of silence that pressed down on walls, that made shadows stretch long across polished floors. Maria moved slowly through the house, her hands aching from hours of labor, her heart heavier than her body would admit. Elijah trailed behind her, carrying a rag too large for his small hands, his eyes restless. He sensed something. He always did. The billionaire sat upstairs in his room, the curtains drawn, the lights dimmed, once again pretending to sleep. But this time, the test was different. This time, he wasn't just leaving a watch or a wallet in plain sight. Tonight, he wanted more. He wanted proof. On the mahogany dresser near his bed, he placed a stack of crisp bills, far larger than anything before. Carelessly, intentionally, as if forgotten. Then, beside it, a diamond cufflink glittered under the faint light. And as though that wasn't enough, he left the safe door cracked wider than ever, rows of wealth gleaming inside. But this time, there was something else too, a small recording device, hidden in the corner. If his eyes missed something, the camera would not. He lay down on the bed, his body still, his breathing slow, eyes narrow just enough to see. He was ready. Ready to catch them. Ready to confirm what he had long suspected. Maria entered first, moving quietly. She never dared disturb the master's rest. Elijah followed, his steps soft, his curiosity alive, his eyes wide as they caught the glow spilling from the open safe. The boy froze. His reflection stared back at him in the glass of the safe door, just as it had before. But this time, temptation wasn't subtle. It screamed at him. Diamonds, gold, money, more wealth in one place than he could ever dream of touching. The billionaire's pulse quickened. His lips twitched into the faintest smile. This was it. Tonight, the boy would break. Maria noticed her son's pause. She turned her head, whispering his name softly, a warning wrapped in love. She knew the dangers. She knew how one wrong move could cost them everything. But Elijah didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the treasures, his chest rising and falling as if the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths pressed on him. He wasn't just seeing money, he was seeing all the times he had gone without. He was seeing the nights his mother skipped meals so he could eat. He was seeing the world tell him he was less, that he would never belong, that wealth like this was never meant for hands like his. His small fists clenched. His jaw tightened. The temptation wasn't about greed. It was about justice. The billionaire leaned forward ever so slightly. He could feel the victory forming. He could feel his suspicion finally taking shape into proof. But then, Elijah did something unexpected. He stepped closer, not to take, but to close the safe door. Slowly, firmly, with a finality that echoed louder than any action before, he pushed it shut. The click rang through the room like a declaration. Maria's breath caught in her throat. Relief washed over her. But before she could move her son along, before she could whisper her gratitude for his strength, the billionaire sat up. No more pretending. No more silence. Stop. The single word cracked through the room like a whip. Maria froze. Elijah's small body stiffened. Slowly, they both turned, facing the man who had risen from his bed, his face half-lit by shadows, his eyes cold and sharp. He stood tall, his robe draped over him like armor, his gaze fixed not on Maria, but on Elijah. "I saw you," he said, voice low, deliberate. "I saw where your eyes lingered. I saw what you wanted." Maria shook her head quickly, panic flooding her veins. "No, sir, he didn't, he never." Silence. The word cut her down. She bit her lip, holding back tears, clutching Elijah's hand so tightly it hurt. The billionaire stepped closer to the boy. "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I haven't seen this before? Poverty breeds desperation. Desperation breeds theft. It's only a matter of time." Elijah trembled, but he did not look away. His small body shook, but his eyes stayed locked on the man towering above him. And in that gaze, the billionaire saw something he didn't expect: defiance. That defiance lit a fire of anger inside him. "You think you're better than this? Better than what I've already decided you are?" His voice rose now, sharp, accusing. "You're nothing but a maid's son. You don't belong in this house. You don't belong in this world of mine. And sooner or later, you'll prove me right." Maria's knees buckled. She fell to the floor, clutching at the man's robe, begging, her voice breaking. "Please, sir, he's just a boy. He's good, I swear to you, he's good." But the billionaire pulled away from her touch as though it burned. He pointed to Elijah, his finger trembling with rage. "This boy will betray you. He will betray everything. And when he does, don't say I didn't warn you." Elijah's chest heaved. His small hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to shout, to cry, to tell this man that he was wrong. But no words came. Only silence. And that silence hurt more than anything. The billionaire turned away, his robe sweeping across the floor, his steps echoing through the room. But just before he left, he said one final sentence that seared itself into Elijah's heart. "You will never be more than what I see right now." The door slammed shut. Maria collapsed, sobbing into her hands. Elijah stood still, his body shaking, tears stinging his eyes but refusing to fall. He felt them burn, but he held them back. Because in that moment, he realized something that no child should ever realize. It didn't matter what he did. He could resist temptation 100 times. He could prove his innocence again and again. But to some, his skin told a story louder than his actions ever could. The next days blurred together. Maria moved like a ghost, her body working, but her spirit broken. Her hours were slashed again. Her wages cut to almost nothing. The whispers among the staff grew crueler, sharper. Elijah felt the stares follow him through every hallway. And then came the breaking point. One evening, when Maria and Elijah entered the mansion, they found security waiting. The billionaire stood in the foyer, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Check their bags," he ordered. Maria's eyes widened. "Sir, please." But the guards obeyed. Rough hands grabbed their worn satchels, emptying them onto the marble floor. A few scraps of bread, a hand-me-down book, a worn piece of cloth. Nothing else. Nothing stolen. Nothing wrong. Still, the billionaire's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with venom. "Not tonight. But soon. It always happens." Maria's tears fell freely now, her body trembling as she held Elijah close. The boy's jaw tightened. His chest burned with anger he couldn't contain. He wanted to scream. He wanted to fight. But deep down, he knew, no matter what he did, the man would never see him. That night, Elijah lay awake on the thin cot, staring at the ceiling. His fists clenched. His heart heavy. And in the darkness, a question echoed in his mind. What more can I do to be seen as human? The mansion was silent again, but this silence was different. It was not the stillness of wealth. It was the silence of wounds too deep for words. And though the billionaire thought he had won, though he believed his suspicion had broken them, he was wrong. Because something had shifted inside Elijah. The tests, the accusations, the humiliation, they had carved something into him. Not weakness. Not desperation. But resolve. Resolve to prove that his worth was not for the billionaire to decide. Resolve to show that dignity cannot be stolen, no matter how cruel the test. And one day, whether the man wanted to see it or not, the truth would confront him. But for now, the boy lay in the dark, clutching his mother's hand, whispering the only promise he could make. I will not break. The stage was set. The breaking point had come. But what followed, the resolution, would reveal whether this story ended in despair, or in a lesson the world could no longer ignore. The days that followed were quieter, but not easier. Maria still worked, her body bent by labor, her voice hushed by fear. Elijah still walked the polished halls, careful not to linger, careful not to breathe too loudly. Outwardly, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. The billionaire went on with his life, his empire untouched, his wealth unquestioned. To him, the night of accusations was just another evening. A moment of suspicion. A confirmation of beliefs he carried long before Maria or Elijah ever stepped through his doors. He didn't think twice. Why would he? For him, power was not questioned. But for Elijah, it was different. That night carved itself into his memory like a scar. The words, the accusations, the feeling of being judged guilty before he had even acted, they stayed with him. And no matter how much he tried, he could not shake the truth. In the billionaire's eyes, he was never more than his skin. It could have broken him. It could have planted bitterness, anger, and hatred so deep that he carried it forever. And for a moment, it almost did. But Elijah held on to something stronger. He held on to the love in his mother's eyes, to the prayers she whispered even when her voice cracked. He held on to the knowledge that no matter what the world told him, dignity was something no one could take, not even the man who owned the house they cleaned. As he grew, Elijah carried that night with him. It became his reminder, not of weakness, but of strength. A reminder that he had stood in the face of temptation, endured humiliation, and still chosen integrity. A reminder that even when the world saw him as less, he had proven himself more. And yet, as powerful as his resilience was, the story did not end with just him. Because Elijah's experience was not rare. It was not unique. It was part of a pattern, a cycle of suspicion, judgment, and injustice faced by countless others who looked like him. A cycle that repeats in boardrooms and classrooms, in stores and on streets, in every place where skin is judged before character. That is what makes this story more than just one child's experience in one mansion. It is a mirror. A reflection of a deeper truth many would rather ignore, that racism does not always scream, it whispers. It hides in suspicion, in lowered wages, in accusations with no proof. It lives in the spaces where power chooses to test the powerless, waiting for them to fall. And so the question is not what Elijah did that night. The question is, what will we do now? Will we let the tests continue? Will we keep watching children grow under the weight of suspicion they never earned? Will we allow dignity to be questioned simply because of skin? Or will we finally decide that stories like this must not repeat? Because Elijah's story is not just about the past. It is about the present. And it is about the choice we still have to make. The boy walked away from that mansion unchanged on the outside, but inside, he carried a truth that cannot be ignored. Racism steals childhood, dignity, and peace long before it ever touches opportunity. And so I leave you with this. How many more stories like Elijah's must unfold before we finally listen? Before we finally change?